All right, we're going to knock at a few policy issues in relation to Iran. There's a little bit of discussion of this in your textbook that you can look at. It is also important that you note, right, the news is a great place to look at this. Yes, we know the news is going to be biased, but if you want the most up-to-date issues on what's happening in Iranian policy, that's probably your best, most up-to-date place to look. I'm just going to hit a few topics. I do want you to know as we go through the slides, you should not feel the need to write everything down. I kind of give you some highlights and I'll let you know what it is that you really need to know on the things or the slides that we are talking about related to Iranian policy. Okay. So first, I just want to remind you real quickly the actors in the policy-making process, right? So you have the president who is leading foreign policy. You've got the Majlis who is in charge of making secular or non-religious based laws, okay, for domestic related policy, okay? You see that that's bolded because it is the main legislative making body. You also see that the Guardian Council is bolded, and if you remember, that's because the Guardian Council kind of serves a quasi-legislative process, right? It is the Guardian Council who determines whether or not to approve legislation passed by the Majlis, not the president. So that's important to note, right? If the Guardian Council wants changes to legislation, they're going to ask the Majlis for that. If the Majlis refuses to do it, right there in the middle of those two bolded institutions, right, we have the Expediency Council, which is typically going to side with whatever the Guardian Council wants, because the Guardian Council and the Expediency Council are those direct representatives of God, right, taking care of the people in divine nature. Okay, we do have the Council of Ministers on there, right? That is the top of the bureaucratic agency. Those are appointed by the president and approved by the Majlis, and they can also be removed by the Majlis. So all of these different agencies are making policy, or the official policy-making agents or law-making agents. One thing I do want you to remember when we talk about policy in Iran, you have your conservatives and you have your reformists. Keep in mind your reformists cannot be anti-regime, or they would not be approved to function and exist within Iran. A large portion of this conservative reformist, what we do see play out in policy deals with economics, but it also deals with the balance between democratic and Islamic principles, and how much, right, civil society and democracy can we allow while still ensuring that we uphold Sharia or godly religious law. So that's important to note. All right. So getting into that economic policy that I talked about, right, when we talked about your reformists and your conservatives, right, that's going to align here with the divide between your statists, which are considered your clerics, and then your free marketers, which are considered your conservatives. So a lot of times your clerics support a more closed off, separated economic policy. And one of the reasons that they do that is because they want to control the information that's coming in. They don't want the Iranian economy to be too much like the West. The West is evil. The West is bad. We don't want any of that. And so, right, they typically support less interaction, so less economic liberalism, right? They don't want to really see as much economic liberalization within the country. We've talked about that term, right? They also see a more active role of the government and the economy in regards to redistribution of wealth. A lot of clerics or statists support redistributing the wealth and making sure that they are providing programs for lower income, which is typically why you see lower income, less educated Iranian citizens more supportive of the regime because the regime is taking care of them. On the flip side of that, with our free marketers and our conservatives, right, they want to allow that market, that supply and demand, to control the economy. They want to open up to more trade because they see this as the growth of Iranian society, the Iranian government, the Iranian economy, particularly on the world stage. One of the things that I thought that was interesting that Mr. Durasavi discussed with us today in class, right, or I guess you're listening to this, so it was yesterday in class, he talked about how he thought prior to the Iranian Revolution is when he saw the peak of Iran culturally on a global scale. And then he saw that decline following the revolution. And he feels like Iran is at the bottom, right? That it's at a tipping point and that eventually this is going to have to switch. So I guess we'll kind of see what happens with that. Another really important thing to note, right, when we talk about Iran is oil. Oil is extremely important. We saw this in Mexico as well. Very similarly to what you see with any like oil rich country, oil is important. It's the name of the game. It typically brings wealth, and it's great when oil is doing well. When oil is not doing well and your economy is not diverse, it is very heavily reliant on oil. That is very harmful, right? Because when the oil industry tanks, then you see struggles among the people. And so that's an issue. We also see unequally distributed wealth. We do see really, really wealthy people, but you also see the government trying to provide some basic services. Your impoverished people, your low-income people, they're not getting rich, friends. They're not moving to middle class, but the government does try to provide basic needs for them because that does provide support for the regime, okay? Because Iran is very oil rich, you saw the government using subsidies, which means they would pay for certain things, right? They would put money into the housing network, into the food network or industry, to the gas industry. They would put money directly in, which would then reduce the cost that the people would have to pay. The problem with that is when they use the subsidies, it reduced the overall cost and therefore the amount of money that these industries were earning. So with a lot of pushback and complaint from a lot of Iranian industry, in 2005, the government quit providing direct subsidies to these things and instead, right, they a couple years later switched to cash supplements. So what they do is they just give Iranian citizens like a certain chunk of money, and the Iranian citizens can use that money to pay for whatever they want to, which again, it does at least free up some of that industry to supply and demand a little bit more and make some of your Iranian businesses a little bit happier, okay? We talked about why it's an issue with the diversification of the economy. So population, I do not want you to write all of this stuff down, right? I want to talk about the population policy and I want you to see how it differs from the other countries. But that's kind of what you need to take note on is how does population policy in Iran different than some of the other countries that we talked about, right? In the UK, we just talked about the fact that their population is aging, right? And to provide for an aging population is difficult because they have greater demands. And when you have more older people than you have working people putting into the system, right, it's a strain on the thing. When we talked about Russia, we talked about the fact that their population growth rate is negative and they're actually trying to get more people. In China, we talked about the fact that they had too many people, so they instituted the one-child policy, right? And basically there was a punishment. You were fined and you lost services from the government if you had more than one kid. Then they had the huge divide between men and women. They eventually changed to the two-child policy. Again, the government is mandating this, and there are consequences if you don't abide by what happens. Chinese people still didn't really want to have babies. They didn't want to introduce that. So now they kind of have like a 3-child, not specific policy, but China's kind of where they are. Okay. Iran is different because they never mandated policy. It wasn't a government requirement. You didn't get a consequence if you didn't follow the policy. They changed other things and they made incentives, I guess, for people to follow it, right? So post-revolution, right? Khomeini really, really pushes for, we want more people. Good Muslims make babies. And that's exactly what they do, right? They listen. They are faithful. They are cultural. They want Iran for Iran. They want to maintain control. And good Muslims, in fact, made babies. They made so many babies, right? It stresses the school system. Eventually, unemployment starts to go up. That's issues. So in the late 80s, they reverse this policy and they say, oh, woo, we made babies. Good job, Iranians. You made those babies. That's too many babies, right? It's stressing the system. So now they say, good Iranians have 2 babies and no more. 2 children is enough. They got the clerics to support this. They said, yep, absolutely. So the government starts providing funds for family planning, right? No consequence, but they say, you know what? We are going to pay, right, for sterilization. If men or women want sterilization, we're going to pay for it, right? There were state-owned and operated contraceptive and condom factories. They were widely available. The government provided that for them, right? So all of that family planning, the government is paying for those procedures. They are paying for supplies and materials, and that is being backed by the clergy, right? It's okay. It's okay. This does not go against Muslim or Islamic faith. You're fine. Okay. They also upped the age, the suggested age for getting married, and they started to provide more opportunities for women because more women getting education, more women in the workforce, increases the age in which women have their first baby. It also decreases the number of babies that they have. And again, that was very, very effective. Okay. Ahmadinejad is elected in 2005. He is a hardliner. He wants to go back to those traditional values, right? He changes it's a relapse in a lot of the rights of women. And he says, no, good Iranians make babies. And they start giving payments. If you have more than one child, then the government is going to give you an extra subsidy or money. Okay. In 2012, under his administration a little bit later, they removed any budget for population control. So all of that money that was spent for supporting sterilization of men and women, supporting funding of contraceptives, all of that stuff, family planning classes, whoop, they cut that out the budget, and none of that is provided any longer. And we see a slight increase in the population. So again, what I want you to know is it's not forceful. They provide incentives and they play on our Iranian culture and duty to Iran to get people to do what they want. There's no consequence for having too many babies or not having enough babies. Okay, so very different than China. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about is the brain drain issue. A lot of well-educated people are leaving Iran, right? So not only are they dealing with the internal numbers of people, but they're also dealing with the types of people that are in Iran and the fact that they need to start trying to breed more educated Iranian citizens for economic purposes. Okay, this is our lovely little population pyramid. Again, I just want to kind of show you some of these shifts. So again, right, this is the age of people now following the revolution. You see this increase, right, post-revolution. Then late 80s, early 90s, we see a shift. Ooh, we've had too many babies. We're struggling. You shouldn't make as many babies. Institute state planning for families. And we see the decline. Ahmadinejad comes to office. And again, he pushes more people. And we see that increase, right? So the population pyramid is just showing evidence of the policy that I just talked about. Okay. Social welfare related issues, education, right? According to the World Bank, there's an 89% literacy rate in Iran, which is pretty good. It is 85 for women and it is 92 for men. So again, there is a gap there, but it's not as big of a gap as we see in some other countries. And again, educating the women has kind of been part of this population policy thing. Part of that brain drain issue that we talked about before. Again, we see here, right? Some of the reasons women are getting more opportunities is because at this point, Iran is like, we don't care who they are. We need educated people in Iran. Okay, so that's important to note. You don't need to write down these percentages related to health, but I did want to talk about it. Life expectancy in Iran is 71. So again, it's relatively high. Most people, about 90% of Iranians, have health insurance. It is provided by the government, right? Since 2009, the government ensures that everybody has basic access to healthcare for preventative care, proactive care, and things like that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. There's going to be one more public policy video that you guys are going to need to watch to make sure that you've gotten everything for the day. All right. Go ahead and watch that third video.